Hey, what's up, gentlemen and ladies? Welcome back to another Final Fantasy news video, and today, believe it or not, we actually got some news having to do with Final Fantasy X, which I was actually thinking about it right before making this video, and I think the last time that I made a video having to do with Final Fantasy X was probably like last year in December when I was doing the whole Final Fantasy Christmas thing, just because I mean, there isn't really much to talk about when it comes to Final Fantasy X, but before I get into the actual news, I just wanted to thank you guys because we finally reached 5,000 subscribers. My next video after this one, unless there's, some kind of really major news that's worth making a video about, should be my 5,000 subscribers special. And if any of you guys have any ideas for something that I could do, then maybe leave it in the comments, because I don't know, I have a couple in mind, but if you guys have any suggestions, that I might consider changing it to something like that, because to be honest, I'm kind of having a hard time thinking with coming up with many different things to do. But anyways, let's not get too much into that. That will be its own video later on. Basically, a while ago at an event called Luca Comics and Games, which is held in Italy, the Luca Comics and Games 2016 event, which I personally had never heard of before, but leave it to Square Enix or Final Fantasy to show up at these random small events that not very many people know of. But basically, Shinji Hashimoto showed up there, and I'm assuming most of you know who Shinji Hashimoto is, but just in case you don't, he's basically one of the major producers from Square Enix in general, and he's also basically known as the biggest troll in the entire company. Like, if there's any jokes or memes that having to do with Final Fantasy or Square Enix, they are probably thanks to Shinji Hashimoto. But anyways, he basically showed up at the event, and he, during an interview, mentioned the possibility of a Final Fantasy X-3 happening. So yeah, that's right, a sequel to the sequel to the sequel, but ignoring the fact that it's really complicated and lightning returnsy like that, which there was actually some news having to do with Final Fantasy XIII as well, but I'll get to that in a little bit. This is actually some pretty major news. So as most of you that have played Final Fantasy X, specifically the HD remaster, know, there was an audio drama at the ending of it, which a lot of people really hated, but one of the major reasons why a lot of people didn't dislike it, or a lot of people did dislike it, double negative, anyways, was because it kind of didn't really close up the story. Like, the ending of Final Fantasy X-2 was okay, but that audio drama was kind of like, well, is there more? And a lot of fans were just kind of kept hanging, and for the longest time we've basically been expecting this Final Fantasy X-3. In fact, if you actually go really far back in my channel, like 2014, I made a video talking about, could we see a Final Fantasy X-3 at some point, and I mentioned the audio drama and all that kind of stuff, because honestly, it's something that people have been asking for a long time. A lot of people have actually been asking for a Final Fantasy X prequel. That's something that people have wanted for a while, so basically it would be like a Final Fantasy X-0, which would, star probably Auron, Braska, and Jact. But from what he said, I mean, he did specifically say X-3, so I'm assuming that it would be a continuation, plus again the previously mentioned audio drama, and he did say specifically that this was due to the success of the remaster. Now again, none of this is like confirmed, they have not said anything about a game, and in fact I'll get into more on that in a little bit, but basically, yeah, he said that he did see the sales of Final Fantasy X's remaster on the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and even the PlayStation Vita. I believe it was ported to that as well, and he knows that a lot of people like it, which is honestly not very surprising, because Final Fantasy X is actually one of the best-selling Final Fantasies. I'm pretty sure it's at the very least within the top 5 Square Enix games, if not higher than that. But yeah, so it's not really surprising to hear that, but basically, he went into talking about how right now they're very busy. Yes, Final Fantasy XV is coming up pretty soon, but on top of that, Nomura, who's like their main man, is really busy working specifically with Final Fantasy VII Remake and Kingdom Hearts 3. And I know, like, this may seem a bit random, like, what does Nomura have to do with it? Maybe they would want Nomura to direct a Final Fantasy X-3, hypothetically, like, I'm not really sure, but even if not that, just the fact that they have these major games coming soon, or at least hopefully soon, should basically tell you guys that, like, yeah, they want to focus on this, they don't want to, like, get another big project, because a Final Fantasy X-3 would honestly be pretty major. Not as major as something like a full-on main series game like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, but probably to the level of something like 13-2 and Lightning Returns and 10-2 itself, which were honestly still pretty big Square Enix games, all things considered. Now, regarding the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Shinji actually did say that the game is far along in development. He didn't say that for Kingdom Hearts 3 though, so I can only assume assume that this means that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is further along than Kingdom Hearts 3. To be honest, I've had this suspicion for a while, but go ahead and tell me what you guys think about that in the comments. And he did actually also go on to mention the fact that Lightning from the Final Fantasy XIII series is still a very popular character within Square. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean. Again, Shinji is a huge troll. He has been known for teasing things like this. So for example, let me give you guys a hint. Back in, I want to say it was the PlayStation Experience 2014, if I'm not mistaken, they like hyped up this trailer that had something to do, it was like Square Enix, right? And like Shinji came up and they were like, oh, it looks like Final Fantasy VII, it has something to do with Final Fantasy VII. Keep in mind that this was before the remake was announced. And they were like, they started showing it and everybody's like, oh my god, it's gonna be a Final Fantasy VII remake. And it ended up just being the port of the PC version to PS4. But then a couple months later, they actually announced the remake. So honestly, Shinji kind of doing this basically all but confirms it, in my opinion. Again, you guys can still believe whatever you want, this is not really confirmation, but the fact that he's going into this, clearly he has a lot of insight within the company, probably one of the most people in all of Square Enix, and him specifically mentioning Final Fantasy X-3 and things having to do with Lightning really makes it seem like that game and possibly some kind of XIII-4 or at the very least Lightning spin-off game might, you know, still be possible at this point. Honestly, personally, I would like to see some kind of Fabula Nova Crystallis spin-off game, like even if it was just a mobile game or something like that, where you actually get to play through the story and the mythology of the Fabula Nova Crystallis world, would be awesome in my opinion. And just to finish this off, he did specifically go on and mention that every Final Fantasy is its own separate entry in the series. Now, this may seem like a bit of a weird thing to mention, but I'll basically tell you guys what he meant by this in a little bit. He specifically talking about Final Fantasy XV and the fact that it is very different, obviously, in terms of graphical style, just art style in general, and obviously its combat and setting and all that kind of stuff, right? Now, a lot of people that are fairly new to the Final Fantasy series may think that, oh, this is just the way that the series is going, like all games from now on are going to take place in this sort of setting and they're all going to be action RPGs and stuff like that. But he specifically said that each game depends on the director individually, and not necessarily because they do something means that they're going to stick with it for future Final Fantasies. As we all know, you know, with Final Fantasy, I want to say 6 was the first one that took place in like a steampunk-esque setting. 6, 7, and 8 all did, and then 9 went back to like medieval, and then 10 was like, well, I'm not really sure what you could consider 10. It was a bit of a blend at some points, and then you had 12, which was, again, medieval, and then 13, which was super like high-tech and futuristic, and then 15, which seems to be kind of like modern times. So in terms of the setting, don't be surprised if like Final Fantasy XVI goes back to being a bit of a more medieval story or something like that, you know, traditional fantasy, and also having to do with the gameplay. Just because Final Fantasy XV was an action RPG does not mean that all future Final Fantasies will be as well, which is something that I've heard a lot of people saying that like, oh, you know, they're dropping turn-based RPGs, or Square Enix is not doing turn-based RPGs anymore for whatever reason. People seem to think that, but this basically confirms that not necessarily that they won't be action RPGs, but that they won't for sure be that just because of Final Fantasy XV, if that makes any sense. So a lot of info that we actually got from this interview with Shinji Hashimoto. Again, it is Shinji Hashimoto, so take everything with a grain of salt, but hopefully we'll find out more about all of these different things in the coming months. Either way, that is all that I have for you guys today. I hope that you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to blitz that like button, subscribe, and as always, stay tuned for all things Final Fantasy!